We're here at the Pax Guest House in Mount St Benedict in northern Trinidad. I've taken this opportunity in these beautiful surroundings. It looks like you've stepped into a set from a period film. The furniture around me is very old, probably 60, 70 years old. But it's great to be here, and I want to do this lesson here for you. This Mastermind Encrypt edition at Exodus chapter 24, verse 12, and it says, "Then the Lord said to Moses, 'Come up to me on the mountain and be there, and I will give you the tablets of stone and the law and commandments which I have written, that you may teach them.'" Exodus chapter 24, verse 12. And as you may recall, this is the premise for my book, Escalate, Taking Your Leadership Higher. So the theme of this lesson is leadership influence grows when leaders intentionally rise to higher levels of calling, character, and commitment. Colossians chapter 3, verse 23 says this, "Whatever you do, work at it with all your heart as working unto the Lord." So whatever we're doing it unto the Lord. It's not for fame, it's not for fortune, but we're doing it as unto God. And leadership is not static. It either grows or it declines. In leadership development circles, we often talk about increasing influence. But as Christian leaders, our influence grows only when our character, our calling, and commitment grows. Proverbs chapter 4, verse 18 says this. It says it very simply. "The path of the righteous is like the morning sun, shining even brighter till the full light of day." Leadership should get brighter, stronger, and clearer over time. And that's the idea behind Escalate. It's about going high. It's moving from one stage to the next, moving up. And it's intentional. It's not something that happens just naturally, but it must be intentional. Now, as we look through the scriptures, we see that God chooses leaders. We look at Abraham. God calls Abraham. He said, "Get out of your father's house. Go to the land that I will show you." And he says, "I will bless you." He chose Moses. He called Moses out of the burning bush. He said, "Moses, Moses." Moses said, "Here I am." His curiosity got the better of him. He called David. He was looking for a man after his own heart. But before we can lead others, we must first lead ourselves. Leadership ability, according to John Maxwell, determines a person's level of effectiveness. So leaders must choose to grow. John Maxwell talks about the law of the lid. He says, if your leadership is here, your people can only grow to this level. But if your leadership goes up, your people can come up after you. In other words, the law of the lid states the level of your effectiveness rises as you decide to grow in your leadership. So growth requires intentionality, not by accident. In Matthew chapter 13, verse 23, in the parable of the sower, Jesus said, "The seed that fell on good ground, those who are open to receive the word, it grew and it brought forth a harvest, 30-fold, 60-fold, 70-fold, and so on." So we understand that leadership must be intentional. So here's a reflection question for you. I want you to complete this statement with me. If my leadership had a lid right now, it would be at the level of, and you put a number, maybe between 1 to 10. It would be at the level of whatever your number is because, and write the reason why you think it could be at that level. Now reflect. What areas of your life or ministry feel stuck? What personal growth habits might raise your leadership lid? So as we look at the book Escalate, we know that it's predicated on the premise of the word escalate. E-S-C-A-L-A-T-E. That's an acrostic. We use it as an acrostic. Remember the old acrostics that you used when you were a child? So number one, elevate your calling. That's the E in our acrostic for escalate. Philippians chapter 3, verses 13 to 14 says this, "Forgetting what lies behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal." This is Paul speaking. Paul was already an established leader. Then God called him, and now he wants to grow in his leadership, and he's pressing on to what lies ahead. So leadership begins with an understanding that your calling requires growth. You cannot stay where you are and fulfill where God is taking you. I want to leave you with a Maxwell insight. Leadership influence grows when leaders raise their personal lid. In other words, you must seek to grow in your leadership. You must seek to raise your personal lid. They keep developing themselves spiritually and personally. So growth, it's not accidental, but growth is intentional. You must desire to grow. When God called Moses up to the mountain, he said, "Come up to the mountain and stay here." Remember that mountain climbing is not an easy task. Think of an old man, probably in the 80s, climbing this mountain because God had said to him, "Come up to the mountain and be here." It was going to take some effort. It was going to take some work. It was going to take some intentionality. Moses would have to work in order to come to the place where God wanted him to be. So my question for you this morning is this: are you willing to put in the work? Are you willing to do what is necessary so that your leadership grows? So, point number one, elevate your calling, go higher. So where is God currently asking you to go higher in your leadership? A couple of areas that you could think about, maybe in character, spiritual discipline, courage, vision. You think about it. Maybe you can add some to those lists. Secondly, the S in ESCALATE is for stand firm in your values. Be committed. Daniel 1:8 tells us about Daniel in Babylon. Daniel resolved that he would not defile himself with the king's meat. In other words, I'm here in Babylon. I'm in a strange place, among strange people, with strange gods, but I will not compromise my values. I will not minimize who I am. You see, values determine decisions. When pressure comes, leaders don't rise to the occasion, they fall to the level of their convictions. I want to say that again. When pressure comes, leaders don't rise to the occasion, they fall to the level of their convictions. John Maxwell says that great leaders lead from clear values and priorities, not from convenience. You know, we're living in a time when value systems are shifting, but your values must remain. When David came to the camp of the Israelites and saw a giant thrash-talking the children of Israel, his brother was a little bit annoyed that he had come to see the battle. And David asked a question: is there not a cause? Is there not something that I must stand upon? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine who is speaking in such a manner to the children of God? So when the time comes and when pressure comes, we must be willing to stand upon the values that we've established, values of honesty, values of integrity, values of spiritual disciplines. We must be willing to stand upon those values and not allow them to be shifted because of the zeitgeist of the time. So what values must never be compromised in your leadership? Some examples are, you can think about them: integrity, faithfulness, biblical truth, humility. Maybe there are some values that you have that you want to add to this list. I want you to do something for me. Write down 3 non-negotiable values. 3 values that you stand upon. 3 principles that you stand upon. The third point of ESCALATE is the C, carry the load with others. That means to share responsibility. In Exodus chapter 18, verses 21 to 22, we see Jethro coming to the camp and seeing Moses leading. From morning till night, he would sit, and the people would come to him with their complaints, big and small. Jethro, his father-in-law, a wise man, the priest of Midian, said to him, "What are you doing? You're going to kill yourself, man." You see, Moses tried to lead alone until Jethro told him, "Select capable men and let them share the burden with you." In other words, select men of understanding. And he said, delegate them to groups of 50, 100, and so on, in order that they may help in the leadership load. And the really important cases, let them bring it to you. In Acts chapter 6, we see the same principle being applied. The apostles had come to arbitrate a very simple matter. The Hellenic widows were not getting food, and they were being left behind. Maybe there was a little racial disparity in the place at that time. And they said, "Seek out from among you 7 men whom we may appoint over this business while we pay attention to prayer," the more important matters. Leadership fails when leaders try to do everything alone. If you're a leader and you're trying to do everything alone, you're not leading very well. It is important for you to select people to whom you can delegate responsibilities to. As I think about this right now, I am here in sunny Trinidad and Tobago. It's still cold in New York City, and I've delegated responsibilities. There was someone who preached on Sunday, there was someone who preached the Sunday before, and I realized that we have a leadership team that can carry the load and share the responsibility. So leadership is not about doing everything. It is about empowering others to succeed. Now, write down for me one responsibility you should be delegating, but you're currently holding on to. Why do you think it is hard for leaders to share the load? These are a couple reflection questions for you. Fourthly, the A in ESCALATE is accountability in leadership. Who are you accountable to? Hebrews chapter 13 verse 17 says that leaders are accountable to God and to one another. Unaccountable leadership eventually becomes unhealthy leadership. You must be accountable to someone. If you're a young leader in your church, in your ministry, you're accountable, first of all, to maybe your group leader. And most importantly, you are accountable to your pastor, to the leaders who are over you. And more important than anything else, you're accountable to God. Even the Apostle Paul surrounded himself with people who could speak into his life. We all need people who can speak into our lives, speak wisdom. Leaders grow faster when they invite feedback and accountability. When you're willing to sit with your leader and allow him to give feedback and to speak into your life. Here's a reflection for you. Who challenges you spiritually? Who has permission to correct you? If the answer is no one, that is a dangerous place to be for a leader. In other words, you must be accountable to someone. The L in ESCALATE means to lead like Jesus, and this is where servant leadership comes in. We've been called to lead, we've been called to serve. Ministry is all about serving. Mark chapter 10 verse 45, Jesus said the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. Jesus redefined leadership for us. The world says leadership means power. Jesus says leadership means service. The highest level of leadership influence, according to John Maxwell, comes when people follow you because they trust you and believe in you. In John chapter 13, Jesus washed the feet of his disciples. And I'm sure they were questioning, why is he doing this? At the end of the exercise, he says to them, he says, I know you're wondering why I'm doing this, and I'm paraphrasing. He says, you call me Lord and Master, and that I am. Jesus never minimized his position. He never minimized his authority and his leadership over them. And that I am. He said, but if I, your Lord and Master, can do that and wash your feet, I'm expecting you to go and do the same. He says, if you know these things, you're blessed if you do them. You see, this is where servant leadership comes in, and this is where it's important to come down to people's levels. I've noticed in pastoring, there's a tendency for leaders to be up here and the people down here. No, let's come down to people's levels. Let's watch them. Let's see them eye to eye. I remember my Bible teacher, Reverend Sidney Ramdale, would always say this. Whenever he meets children, he would get down on his hands and knees, and he would get down so I can be on eye level with them. I want to see them. I want them to see me, because if I stand up, I'm like this big giant in front of them. So we must be willing to lead through humility. Jesus says that's the path forward. He says if you want to lead, you want to be great, you must first be a servant of all. So here's a reflection for you. What does servant leadership look like to you practically in your ministry context? What does it look like? Here are some examples you can think about as you ponder this question. Listening. The Bible says each one of you should be quick to listen, slow to speak. How about encouraging others? How about developing people? How about celebrating others' successes? When you see people doing well, be sure to compliment them and celebrate it with them. The second A in ESCALATE is attitude, your attitude under pressure. Your attitude determines your altitude, according to John Maxwell. James 1, 2, and 4 tells us about persistence and perseverance and persecution. You see, pressure reveals what is inside a leader. Great leaders maintain faith, calm, and perspective, even during times of difficulty. Maxwell insight would be leadership is tested most in adversity. Think about the last time leadership pressure hit you. What did your reaction reveal? How did you respond? Point number 7, the T in escalate, try and try again. Perseverance through failure. Proverbs 24:16 says, the righteous fall 7 times and rise again. Failure is not the end of leadership. It is often the training ground of leadership, stepping stones to success. Peter failed dramatically, yet Jesus restored him and used him powerfully. According to John Maxwell, successful leaders fail forward. So write down one leadership failure that taught you an important lesson, and you can share it with your colleagues and share it with your friends. Number 8, the E in escalate, the last E, energize, creating momentum. Romans 12:11 says, never be lacking in zeal, but keep your spiritual fervor serving the Lord. Energy is contagious. Passion in leadership creates momentum in ministry. According to John Maxwell, people are drawn to leaders who are enthusiastic about the mission. Are you excited about the mission that God has called you to? Are you excited about your leadership role? What practices help you maintain passion and spiritual energy? Maybe you can think about some of them. How about prayer, vision reminders, celebrating wins, mentoring others? Finally, I want to say that leadership growth is intentional. If we want our leadership to rise, we must escalate. I want you to think about one leadership principle that you will intentionally work on in the next 30 days. And as a final encouragement, I want to read from 1 Corinthians chapter 15, verse 58, in which Paul says, stand firm, let nothing move you. Always give yourselves fully to the work of the Lord. Leadership influence grows when leaders keep growing, keep serving, and keep lifting others. And when we do that, our leadership will continue to escalate. Trust that you will understand this morning that leadership growth is not accidental. It is intentional. God bless you.